to deal with this, actually. Hey, perfect. Should be fine. Okay, guten Morgen. Good morning. First of all, Your Excellencies, attendees, and of course, the Academy for Cultural Diplomacy. Many thanks for organizing this event in particular. And I'm glad that this is taking place in the German capital. I say this because it is unprecedented. And it's unprecedented for many reasons that we understand and we don't. So you're making history by putting this particular issue at the core of Yemen discussions. And it is the right time because it's been overshadowed pretty much by developments in the European borders there in Ukraine. So well done for that. And I'm also thankful that you also have Jamal al-Ma'mari with us here today, which will testify to some of the human elements of detention and torture and human rights in Yemen. And I think this is the highlight of the day. So big applaud for these efforts. Today I want to talk about the Houthi ideology in particular. And my speech will be divided into 4 categories. One, I'll start by just unpacking the Houthi ideology. Pretty much we don't seem to understand it as much. And then the implications for democratization inside Yemen, but also the broader ramifications beyond Yemen. And then I'll just highlight very briefly the interest of actors within the region in the way I should, not the way that deserves too much unpacking, and then the responsibilities of international actors in view of what's about to be discussed today. So Europe Day was just about 3 weeks ago, if I remember correctly. It was a day to celebrate European unity, but also the gun days of Nazism and fascism and all of these radical ideologies. And when we talk about this, we talk about emerging ideologies that have been shaping the region, the Middle East and the broader vicinity. And since the 1979 revolution in Iran, or the coup d'etat of Shah, we've also seen an expansion of Iranian influence. And these do not go in isolation. And that takes me specifically to the Houthis, who the Houthis are, what do they want, and what are the basic ideas that define and drive their behavior in Yemen and beyond. Dr. Dylan, right, mentioned that people do not seek war or conflict, but there are ideologies that actually inherit the way to war through some of the basic principles. And I think it's why we had promoting death the first 2 terms. So the Houthis are basically a group that belong to Jaludiyya, and Jaludiyya is one of the sects of Zaydism. It's closer to the 12 sect in Iran and beyond. And Zaydism represent about 30 to 35% of Yemeni society. So the Houthis are just one sect of that broader Zaydism. And Zaydism is a sect, of course, under Shia. But we call Zaydis in Yemen the Sunnis of the Shia, and we call Shafi'is the Shia of the Sunnis. That's the sort of harmony we've had for actually centuries in Yemen. And Al-Jaludiyya basically claims the God-given right to rule. And it defined many centuries ago that, it specified so it's a it's a theocracy basically, where Imam Ali to them is the source of that bloodline that should continue. So for them it's inherited. And when we debate that, we go back, many centuries, like 1,400 years ago. We're in the 21st century now and we're still stuck there. There must be something wrong, like honestly. And with that bloodline, so they perceive the God-given right to rule the people, which already gives you a set of political privileges that others, the rest of the society, who make up more than 90 to 95 of the Yemeni public, are basically servants to this very class. And with that come also not only social status, but economic privileges, which I'll talk about later, like al-khums, 1/5, the 1/5 law. So whatever you make, 1/5 of that would go basically for al-Bayt, like the Hashemites in general. And I want to emphasize here that not all Hashemites are Houthis, just to be clear. But there are, of course, benefits that come just by free riding that circle. If I'm going to give you 1/5 of whatever the state is making, be it from oil, minerals, trade, you got to be excited for that. It's free money, basically, which redefines the political economy of the country. It has actually reshaped the political economy in Sana'a. You see a new rich class that actually had nothing or whatsoever in terms of real estate, in terms of money, in terms of capital. But today they are not only the rulers of Sana'a, they're also the rich class that had nothing just 7 years ago. And the Houthi ideology has a basic title. It's the second word, death. That's their slogan. That's their message in life, death. Death to America, death to Israel. And the idea of death here, regardless of whoever is targeted, it just tells you the kind of message that they have in life, which is, the opposite. And that death ideology that we saw expand in Yemen since 2004 have had 6 wars against the state. People usually say, the state should apologize. There is no state or whatsoever that apologizes for counterinsurgency campaigns. There were 6 counterinsurgency campaigns, and yet the state apologized in 2012 and 13 during the National Dialogue Conference as a good of reconciliation, which is, one way to move forward. But it seems that in the quest to move forward, we just went backward. We had a many-scale conflict which was geographically limited in Sa'da, like the north of Yemen, but then it expanded to what we see today across the country. And how do you get to death is to start wars. And if you see the geography of Houthi expansion in the past 18 years, it's been many wars, but in every single war, they've been able to expand territorially. They've been able to recruit, use their opponents, amplify the grievances. Yes, conflicts do start because of grievances, but also continue because they're weaponized, and weaponized in smart ways. That actually, when you look who was their ally yesterday, wasn't just Houthi sympathizers. It was at some point the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, the head of the General People's Congress. And before him were the joint meeting parties, the opposition, including Islah. So they were able to play a wide array of grievances to their advantage. And if we talk about one thing that they've done the most in the conflict that are quantifiable is the issue of landmines. Over the course of the conflict, the intensification of the conflict rather, because they've been in a state of conflict just as at a lesser or a smaller scale, they've laid more than 1 million mines across the country. And that's indicative of their priorities to the people, commitment, and beyond. And among the executive bodies that they have established during the conflict is the Jihadi Council, and that's the highest level of authoritative entity that they have. And the word jihadi is self-explanatory here for an ideology that prides itself in a message of death. But what does all this mean for Yemen? What implications does it have? Politically, the whole Jarudi thing is closer to Wilayat al-Faqih principle in Iran, where you have a state and then you have Ayatollah al-Mufti above the state. It's like the president of the president, who's held by no power in practice, but is still their friends at times of crisis. And we've seen this model being exported to Iraq. It's been present in Lebanon, and now it's at the vicinity of our brothers in the Gulf region. And that's gonna be a threat to continue for the future. So it's an invasion. We were not a perfect democracy. We were a fragile democracy, or what Barbara Wattler calls basically an autocracies. Like, it's not a full autocracy, but not a full democracy. It was fragile. And then we saw aggression by means of elections, by means of the people's choice. And now the militias that actually do not believe on any of these constitutional things that we have accomplished in the post-1962 revolution, which was the Republican revolution. So yes, we talk often about the proxy dynamic in Yemen, but the whole nature of the conflict is Yemeni. The regionalization of it is just one facet. Today it's a struggle really between the remnants of the Republican forces, but also what I call the new imamate. We were at some point an imamate across history. The Houthis didn't rule more than Houthi ancestors didn't rule more than 200 to 300 years, which was sporadic, and then they frame it within the bigger 1,000 years existence, which is often not necessarily true. And so that's an invasion on democracy. The fragile democracy that we had, the aspirations for better human rights, for more progress in Yemen, for more human development that actually reflects on the public. And if we look at the education file, we also see a collapse in education. We see a generation that's being brainwashed, a generation that lost primary schooling. And it is, for any state, the primary corner for indoctrination or shaping their political beliefs or basic nurturing of both the heart and the mind. So in the past couple of years, upon starting the capture of the state, the Houthis appointed Yahya al-Houthi, who was an asylum seeker here in Germany. And the first thing he did is he attempted to change the curriculum at schools. He focused on two subjects primarily, history and religion. History to reshape the Houthi narrative of how things were and how they should be, including by paying allegiance to Abdul Malik al-Houthi and his teachings, what they call malazim, which I encourage all of you to look at just to see how progressive they actually are. And I hope someone endeavors to translate them into English, because they really literally educate you about how far the Houthis want Yemen and the broader region to be. And that land mining of minds now is going to be indoctrinated. So basically, whatever is happening in Yemen, like the regional intervention, the rest of Yemenis, the US and broader region, there is a systematic incitement of violence through education. And a kid is nurtured in the early stages of schooling. So that's gonna play out. And then the next phase, that if families resist or schools, we've had dozens of schools that actually were shut down because they didn't absorb the new changes made by the Houthis. And some of them were turned into military facilities in Sana'a. And many international reports do not break down whatever statistics that they have. And I think this is one of the leading fallacies we have in Yemen with data. And then one tool we have is summer schools. Like when I did my summer schools, I went to Oslo to study peace research. I went to Cambridge to do international security and intelligence. I had all of these exciting programs where you meet smart intellectuals, people who worked across state, political, diplomatic, economic, and security apparatuses. When I compare what I did in my young years, just a couple of years ago, you basically see that the Houthis take people to indoctrinate them about who to pay allegiance to. They have 1 to 2 weeks of summer school where they would isolate you from family, take you into a camp, systematically teach you what they want in terms of allegiance, the shape of political system, that you should submit to Abdul Malik al-Houthi, and actually believe in the idea of God-given right to the rest of the country, by no choice, by no merit, but bloodline, or there are other ways to go around that as well. And in that, actually, people are sent to the front lines. If you look at the statistics, they say 30,000 people were recruited. This is absolutely the tip of the iceberg. And the tip of the iceberg in countries like Yemen, where you have data deficit access issues, you don't know how bottom is the bottom, actually. So that's the tricky component. The Houthis have announced that they actually have more than 1 million summer school students, mainly below the age of 18. And if you just take humble, count of that, if they, have 40,000 graduates every year, within 10 years, they would have an army of 400,000 young people ready to fight for an idea they don't understand its prospects, a message against life. And I think that's a big threat for Yemen, because terrorism and ideologies of death do not necessarily fade. They actually incite other ideologies to emerge, and so as when they seek assistance. And in the past years, we've also seen a rise in Salafism in Yemen. And that's one of the facets of resistance. There have been massive transformation within Saudi Arabia, but for reasons I don't genuinely understand, there have been also investment in Salafi movements generally. And that tells you about the militarization of society and the deepening sectarianism that we see. So because you have families affected by airstrikes, yes, but airstrikes is just one facet. You've had people whose assets were bombed, not only looted. We've had mosques, the places we cherish the most in any religion. They were bombed as well. We've had militarization of hospitals. They were turned at some point into military facilities, actually. And then eventually at some point either get targeted for wrong reasons or otherwise. So if many reasons to actually radicalize. The very existence of this very ideology of death is actually going to play out in inconceivable ways in terms of radicalization of the younger generation that's not educated, that lost its source of income. And then, of course, you have the political rights. We've seen a decline. If you look at any of the indicators, whether the press freedom or the Global Peace Index or the Human Development Index, we've at least went down in the past decade by at least 20 ranks. And special thanks to the Houthis, actually. And then we have the issue of human rights. We today, as I noted earlier, we have Jamal Ma'mir who will be speaking about his time in Houthi prison. And I don't know what that looks like, but someone who's been there can tell you what that looks like better than anyone. And then we've seen also a collapse in the civil society. Most of the civil society organizations that were working from Sana'a, Yemen, they either left or were shut down or co-opted to make a living, or at least play the politics, which is very common in politics. And very few civil society organizations that can actually criticize the Houthis. There's almost none. And I say almost because there are very few of them, and they work within the sanctioned remit, and they adapt to the international mood beyond the limits that they understand. And then, of course, the violence against women. Yemen is a very conservative society, just like the broader region. We're not only driven by religion, but also culture, and it shapes our way of life. So issues like just hijacking a house where women is still in is actually a black shame, let alone to talk about detaining women, torturing them, and actually criticizing, committing crimes as much as rape. And this has been pretty much documented by the United Nations Security Council panel of expert reports. So this is aggression in so many ways, not only in our aspirations to have a better political system that delivers public goods, or nurtures the young generation to see their prospects in life, to contribute to the dream of building a modern civic Yemeni state for all, but also that doesn't respect their women. In any society that doesn't respect their women cannot make further progress in life across sectors. Usually when I talk about women, people ask me, what does your mom do? My mom is a housewife, and I say, she spent all her life to produce what I am today. And if a woman doesn't work, she does a lot of great work behind the shadows. And I'm afraid, and I fear, that this aggression in Yemen, if not checked, is going to take us very much backwards, more than that we actually are today. So this supremacist, chauvinist ideology that divides society into classes, where it inherits its social status on top, actually has the 1/5 low tax rule, which they have been promoting. From a political economy perspective, it does change the balance of economies within the country. It refocuses the tools of wealth and power within a certain class, which doesn't make up more than 5% of the Yemeni society. And then if you follow Yemen or the basics, you would hear people do not receive salaries. And the Houthis, in terms of customs and taxes, have made more than the Yemeni state before than 2014 or even 2011. But where does that money goes? They don't pay salaries. People go to schools to work, to the public office, and if they talk about salaries, they're criminalized. That they are what they call aggression or the collation. And that act of demonization just basically doesn't allow people to talk about the basic of rights. Just imagine any one of you here today. Would you go to the office if you're not paid a day or your salary is delayed a day? Imagine that's the situation for 5 years. You're the exception than the norm. For 5 years. And that's a legitimate right that you basically earn by your hard work, by your sweat and tears, day and night. And then you have the jibayat, or the heavy levies that they have, because they have established. If you look at Iraq, the state is not necessarily run by those who you see, but also the shadow entity. And the shadow entity in Yemen is a network of supervisors that are tied into all the political establishment that they have founded under the executive council. So if you want to get gas in Sana'a, for example, you have Aqil, and Aqil is like the head of the neighborhood. They would have to take all your personal details. It's one form of biopolitics, the governance and intelligence on bodies. So you would have to get all your data, how many people live, your political inclinations, actually should be, if not with them, at least with no views at all. And if you are in some way with them or didn't accept taking the gas through them, then I know very first-hand cases of arbitrary detention just on the merit of suspicion. And then media. And between 2011 and 2014, we see an expansion in press in Yemen. For example, we had one daily newspaper, and then that expanded to 15. We saw an expansion in TV channels into 10 independent TV channels, which was non-state controlled. Today, what we see in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, one voice, one color, one, backward identity that frames things the way they should. And that's the everyday of every Yemeni in their held areas, whether at evenings when they chuqat at diwans or otherwise. So, interest of international actors, and that's the third component, and from here I'll be quite quick. Unpacking all of these contradictory, non-complementary interests is going to take me ages. But I want to take it from the perspective of what kind of Yemen the international community wants to have, and especially our neighbors in the Gulf, and even in the African Horn. Is it a Yemen that's, a seed for expansion of terrorism, radicalization, competing fanatic ideologies of death, regardless of whether the Sunni Daesh that you know, or the Shia Daesh that you might have heard of? And is it the army of young kids who've been brought in times of increasing poverty, in times of famine, crisis, and cycle of a never-ending conflict? Or do you want a Yemen that's stable, that actually pushes back against all of this, from education to human rights to political and civic rights to the shape of political system, to actually the regime and to the safety and security of the maritime and trade borders? If you look at Yemen as an opportunity, then it's a land of potential. The location is geostrategic, it speaks about itself. It overlooks two seas, both the Arabian and the Red Sea, supervises Bab al-Mandab, and has beautiful island. If you've ever interested in tourism, Socotra is the place, just not now. And I want you to think about the interests of international actors. From what kind of Yemen do you want to see it in the next decade, 2, 3, 4, not just from the short-term conflict mitigation measures. And that takes me to the responsibilities of international actors in view of what's being said. Decades ago, Germans and Europeans did counter Nazism, and every single European should be proud of that. Today we have new Nazism in the form of new imamate in Yemen, an ideology that shouldn't be reconciled with unless it makes concessions of equal citizenship based on human values, based on shared identity, the identity of all Yemenis, and not defining Yemen by a sect or a religion or a race or a group. And that effort to counter some of these identities that are tied to the transnational network of Iran in the region, which have proven to be not stabilizing in any way, shape, or form. And it's not me saying this because I want to, but it's the evidence that have emerged from Lebanon to Iraq post the invasion, to Yemen and Syria, obviously. And then in media, we saw recently, as was mentioned earlier, with the invasion of Ukraine, we saw Europeans ban Russian state-owned media. And Russia is a state. We're dealing in Yemen with militias that actually do not subscribe to any international conventions or agreements. So from a legal point, international law is zero to them. But that doesn't mean states shouldn't act or shouldn't invest in countering some of these by investing in banning some of the media, both in traditional and digital forms, but also banning some of the activities that incite violence and death and promote these ideologies from German territories. And I think this is important. So as for across the EU. The second, there is a need to also expand targeted sanctions. And by targeted sanctions, you want to target. I'm not an advocate of the FTO, to be honest, mainly because they would affect the people more than the group itself. But that doesn't mean there are other alternatives that focus on freezing the financial tools that continue to sustain the ability to finance the conflict. Some of these are trade to oil trade, which goes basically facilitated through the UN. And if you look at the names, you'll see some of the Houthi ruling class. So you might want to focus on these. The financial transactions. In Canada, for example, there was a Houthi sympathizer, if the person doesn't want to call themselves as a Houthi. And in one small fundraising, the person fundraised about 1.5 million. That was public. These kind of activities should be subject to scrutiny by respective authorities across the EU. The third is, of course, if we talk about alternatives, what alternatives do we have in Yemen? We have a number of militias that exists in the country, but you also have a fragile government. Do you want to not support the government because you do not want to be related to the conflict and describe them from a point of balance in diplomacy? And we know diplomacy is a beautiful word, but as noted earlier, there's the business that drives it, and the back channels. Even if you complain about trade deals we've seen Germany, for example, reconsidering some of its positions during COVID, thanks to the pushback or the consequences of the conflict, of the pandemic, sorry, so much associated with the conflict. And the government, you could provide support in the form of supporting the rehabilitation of state institutions, supporting reformation, education, supporting the military and intel entities. If you don't want to provide arms, just as being provided elsewhere within the vicinity of the region, there are other ways. There are trilateral arrangements. And the last 2 points is to take really punitive measures to halt the militarization of education. The European model of education has contributed to where Europe is today, 70 years or 70-ish years after the end of the Second World War. And in Yemen, we've been stuck in a cycle of violence. That could be one facet where the Europeans and Germany in particular can focus on if it doesn't want to get its hand, muddy in the conflict in any way. There are ways to look to the future, and the seeds of the future are in the education that's spread today. And the final point is to try to listen to Yemenis from across. And today, the balance between having German voices and Yemeni voices is important, from the civil society, think tanks, human rights organizations, academia is important. And I'm happy that I started this today before I hear to the other guests, because I hope this feeds in whatever is going to be said next. And with that, thank you very much for listening, and apologies for taking more time.
Or maybe if you can come back to the microphone, we'd love to give the opportunity for at least a few questions or comments from you. As I said, please don't be shy. Just raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment or pose a question. And also if you could briefly introduce yourself so we can get a sense also where you're coming from. We have a very diverse audience. Who would like to go first, please? And also, why don't we, maybe Esteban, could you give him the microphone so that it's okay for the video camera? Or... All right, okay, I will do it myself then. Okay, here you go. Please, if you could speak just for the video camera. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I just have two questions. The first one, when was the last time you've been to Yemen? And the second question, what do you think of the new committee led by Rashad Al-Alimi?
The PLC?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me actually tackle the first, it's easier. The last time I was home, like in person, was 2 weeks before the coup d'etat. But that doesn't mean we have our people on the ground. And people like Zaid, for example, goes quite often into the country. Actually, when I was following military developments in Ma'arib, I was checking his Twitter account. But I did plan actually to go multiple times, and then last minute just let somebody else do. The second question with regards to the PLC, or the so-called Presidential Leadership Council, it's an interesting development. Let me put it that way. But we were, for the past 6 years, stalled in a cycle of non-progress. The idea of transfer of power didn't emerge just with the PLC. It was discussed many times since 2016, except that of the regional push that happened in recent times, happened 6 years ago when we had one consensual vice president. We didn't have many militias on the ground. We didn't have more sub-hits within that entity. We would have been way much better. And so the region, so our immediate vicinity in Yemen. So the PLC gathers competing profiles and groups whose objectives are not necessarily complementary or shared at core. And it's a team of rivals. So in 2019, we had the Riyadh Agreement. We have the Southern Transitional Council and the government. And then I called the government a team of rivals. Today we have 4, 5, 6 entities within one body. So it's even a more difficult team of rivals to manage. I wish them all the luck. So it depends on how we define success. If success by what we saw in the past 7 years also is being celebrated as partial success, then I bet people can have their own definitions of success. But if that success is going to be the reunification of at least one objective, which is to not put the region, and I mean the Gulf, facing a long-term security threat, because that has been the case for Iranian-backed paramilitary groups that have been expanding in the past 4 decades. And it's a question of time. They're actually, in the Arab Spring, when we had developments in Bahrain, we saw quick intervention. And that was just indicative of how the Iranians had more investment to actually cause some instability. And now they have it in Yemen. So that encirclement is going to be a feature of time, if unresolved today or in the next couple of years.
Additional questions or comments? Okay, over there. We'll bring the microphone to you, and then, as always, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. My name is Jaideep. I'm a student at ICD. And my question for you is that you touched upon various aspects like the sectarian divide, the religious divide that is bothering Yemen and its relations with the neighboring regional hegemon, Saudi Arabia. But don't you think that the ideology that is being pushed by the Houthis, or even the radicalization programs by the Houthis, are just a face, a political tool to create more divide? But the underlying thing here is more about great power politics, because you have a regional hegemon, Saudi Arabia, which I think is playing a proxy war, like Professor Didam mentioned. Dr. Didam mentioned that it is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and whatever happens, these two countries are not going to be satisfied with opposing ideology at their neighborhood. It is what is happening even in Ukraine. Russia is not allowing a democratic government in Ukraine. So don't you think it has more to do with the great power politics dynamics?
Good question.
Thank you.
I wouldn't call it great power dynamics. None of them is great by merits of global great powers. But I want to be clear before I make a comment on your question. Within the Gulf region, I mean, Iran is distant by rules of geography. So if I learned anything from Robert Kaplan, in Saudi Arabia, we have shared history with them. We have not only shared language, but also roots and identity. And in terms of their position in the region, no Gulf country or even Arabian country can compete or outweigh their presence in the region. That's a fact of geopolitics that it's been playing for long. So within that reality, do you want a small entity to take a whole fate of country like Yemen into fighting the regional hegemon? Like, it's nonsense. Even if you want to fight imperialism, it's far away, it's not here. It's not in Yemen or the Gulf region, or and these are some of the slogans that you see by Iran's network of paramilitaries. The second, any region has competing wings, of course, and with these wings come competing projects. I would like to see what the Iranians can offer to Yemen, if anything at all, that contributes to human development, that contributes to a progressive education model, to human rights, anything that's bright at all. Within the conflict, either in the past, when they were sending logistical and military support long before 2011, we didn't see anything dedicated to economic relations or people-to-people relations beyond the brainwashing through some means where they would send you on a scholarship, and then that was part of actually recruitment by Iranian intel there, which we saw some of the non-faces today. But yeah, the fate of geography must not be abandoned in any region across the world. It's a feature by which any ruling elite try to factor, and the shared commonalities that we have within the Arabian Peninsula outweigh anything that has to do with Iran. So, to be clear.
Well, on that note, I'd like to ask everyone's assistance in expressing our sincere gratitude to Mr. Ibrahim Jalal.